What's the tea with ACP? Here's the tea with ACP. That's kind of cute. Hello and welcome to What's the Tea with ACP. This is Elliott Paige and I will be your host for today. Today we have with us Henry Hubbard and a little bit about our web series. We are a platform that talks with featured artists, chat with them about what's going on in their lives, their art, and their social experiences. Today's tea is ProductiviTEA. And this edition of What's the Tea will discuss Henry's project, the Podcast Opera Project, and the Podcast Opera Podcast. Boom. The unique idea behind it and how it came to fruition. Thanks for joining us for What's the Tea. I'm going to bring Henry in. I totally messed up the title. Say the title for me, Henry.
You are all good. No, it is kind of confusing. So we are the Podcast Opera Company, otherwise known as POCO, but we have the POCO Podcast. So it makes it a little hard to find it if you're just searching it. But yeah.
You can find
yeah, there's our handle right there.
So we have Henry on today. I'm going to give you a little bit more info about Henry. So Henry Hubbard is a versatile tenor, teacher, writer, and entrepreneur with experience in opera, art song, and contemporary music. As a performer, Henry has portrayed over 12 operatic lead roles in the United States, Canada, and Italy. He currently serves as a vocal fellow for the Baltimore Chorale Arts Society and performs regularly in churches and small venues around Baltimore. Henry works in nonprofit development and recently found the Podcast Opera Company to combine the art of musical storytelling with the medium of podcasting. He's passionate about the social impact and value of music and works to deconstruct boundaries in art and society which keep people apart. He holds degrees in voice performance, pedagogy, musicology, and finance from the Peabody Conservatory and James Madison University. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you for having me.
So, Henry and I know each other from our time at James Madison University.
Go Dukes.
Go Dukes, where we were both studying music there. And we were in a couple of shows together and just kind of like hung out every now and then, you know, and we became good friends since then. And we've seen each other a lot over the last couple of weeks. So
Yeah.
Which has been really great.
Not a lot for 7 years and then a bunch over the past couple of weeks.
Exactly. So to get to our tea for today, which is productivity, let me give you a little definition of productivity. So the definition is the quality or state of being productive. Now, that's not the most clear definition because, we're talking about what does it mean to be productive. So the productive definition is having the quality or power of producing, especially in abundance, or effective in bringing about, or yielding results, benefits, or profits. So I'm wondering, what does it mean to be productive for you, Henry? And then I'll say what it means to be productive for me.
Mm-hmm.
Getting right into the meat and potatoes.
So when I think of productivity, I mean, pretty much exactly what the definitions were you just read, right? You have creating things, an abundance of things, right? Or yielding a lot. And the more I think about it, the less useful it becomes, right? Mm-hmm. I think of productivity mostly goes hand in hand with another T, which is sustainability.
Mhm.
So to me, what it truly means to be productive is to be able to achieve a lot over and over and over again. Um, it's like you can do a lot in one day, but if you can't keep that up, then it's not worth very much. So to me, it is being able to, put yourself in at least individually, to put yourself in a situation where you can get results over a longer period of time.
Totally, totally. I think also for me, like when I think of the definition of productivity is not necessarily, I don't know. It's weird because different aspects of your life cause you to be productive in different ways, I
Mhm.
think. Because there's the artistic space, there's the kind of business side, there's the organizational space. So it's hard, I think, sometimes to be productive when there's so many different ways of you being like spaces of being pulled, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I guess, I mean, if we look at the definition of productivity, it totally makes, being productive, it totally makes sense. But I think sometimes when we think of productivity, it's like results that we can feel and
Hmm.
tangibly see, right? But there's also this space of productivity that is a little bit more, I don't know, I want to say like esoteric, like this,
Hmm.
like, it's like your personal productivity. Like, did you make your bed today?
Yeah.
Is that being productive? I think it is. If you're taking the time to keep, things in order, that's a type of productivity where you don't necessarily see any like yield from it, but you see your own, I guess, personal focus, which
Hmm.
is a form of being productive. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
think a lot of times we take the word productivity and we turn it into like, I'm doing this so that I can gain that,
Yeah.
right? And but there's also this space of, I'm doing this so that I can grow. I'm doing this so that I can, invest something into something else. So sometimes it becomes a little bit cyclical instead of
Hmm.
like, just getting something for doing something, which I
Well,
think.
and as like so much in our society, we tend to reduce things down to the numbers,
Mhm,
right? And so I think that there is um, an inherent context of productivity around numbers and around the quantitative, right?
mhm,
And even that is shown in the definition and exactly what I said earlier, right? It's a lot, an
mhm,
abundance of something. When to be truly productive, there also has to be the qualitative aspect to it. It needs to be good work. People always say work smarter, not harder.
mhm,
Right? It's like you can put a lot of work in, but what is the result? Doing one really quality thing every day. If you
mhm,
make your bed really well, that's
mhm.
productive. You know,
Right.
rather than if you had an entire floor covered in clothes, as I do. If I pick up, two things off of my floor, in a way, that's also productive
Mhm.
because, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of gray area, as you were
Yeah.
saying.
It's like working toward a goal that is not something quantitative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Good. I love it. So I want to chat with you a little bit about your project that you've been
Hmm.
working on. Um, I have listened to many episodes and I find it to be a really, really unique blend of story and music and information that I have not experienced in another
Hmm.
platform before listening to the podcast. So, can you talk to us a little bit about kind of how your podcast works and what how you came up with this awesome idea?
Yeah. So the podcast opera company and the POCO podcast are pretty much exactly what they sound like, and at the same time, nothing like they sound like. Right? Like that doesn't give you a lot of information, but it is musical storytelling largely with interview and other podcast elements interweaved throughout. And the point of it is to focus on the story, right? Is to do whatever is necessary to tell the story and to give people information that they otherwise wouldn't get in this form. So what we do is we start with a story. We start with an idea. I truly believe that everything in life comes down to ideas. And at the heart of every story is some first idea. And so what we do is we look at that idea and build stories out of them. And then along the way, however it needs to be told, whether it's through spoken word or sung music or instrumental.
Uh-oh. I think we just lost Henry. I'm sure he'll come back on shortly. But until then, let's see. Okay, he's coming back on. Okay, there we go. This is live, honey. This is listen.
Got kicked out somehow.
Yeah, that's how y'all know it's really live. Have to record it live. All right, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So where was I? Yeah. So in sum, what we do is we try to tell stories however they need to be told. And what ends up happening is that each episode, each production can look a little bit different. If you listen to our entire first season, which is out now, the structure of each episode changes. So sometimes there is more talking, sometimes there is more singing. In our first episode, there's or I guess technically the second episode, it's part 2 of the first one. There's an entire meditation which you can follow along with, right? There are things that you wouldn't expect to see, and that's how we try to keep it interesting and engaging. And just a little bit about how this idea came about. It was about 5 or 6 years ago. I was at JMU at that time, and I was always looking for ways to do things differently. And so this kind of grew. Honestly, I couldn't tell you exactly how, but I came up with this concept to write operas for podcast. And it just came into my head one day. And then the more I developed it, the more I learned about the technology and how we could really innovate opera by taking it outside. The initial idea was how to take opera outside of the hall, outside of a live performance space, and see if you could keep it intact in a different format. And since then, it has grown and changed into something that goes above and beyond any one genre or any one medium, which is why we've actually just chosen to name the podcast the POCO Podcast, right? From the Podcast Opera Company, is because at this point, it's not opera. It truly is becoming podcast opera, something new, something different.
I love
and as you can tell, it's hard to explain because it's not all the way there. It is still growing. It is still really what it is the process that we're working on. And the end result really surprises us. So,
well, that actually, so as you all know, if you've been watching, I typically ask guests to come up with questions, and Henry had some really great questions. And that point actually leads us to this question right here. What does it mean to create a new art form? Which I feel like this really is a unique, the closest thing I can think it reminds me of is like in the 50s when they used to do like radio broadcast storytelling, and then like there would maybe be like a musical number in between. However, there's something in there that's just a little bit different that makes it more I don't know. It's like if an opera company and NPR and like something else had a baby and like readers and like I don't know, Reader's Digest had a baby. Because for me it was so interesting because there was also like one of the episodes that I really liked was the one about the Quakers, because it was something that I was unfamiliar with. Like, I had no idea what Quakerism was, or I mean, I had an idea,
Yeah.
um, and through the way that the story was told, because it was comedic. Like, it
Hmm.
was also this like space of comedy brought out of seriousness.
Yeah. That
That
one had
was,
a nice balance.
yeah,
The
that was just so unique.
yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think it takes to create a new? I mean, for me, I think it takes bravery.
Hmm.
To take the first step. I think is always brave when you're creating something new. Um, and
Yeah,
then
that's a
yeah, yeah.
sorry, continue.
No, I was just gonna say, and then it takes um, more of that to keep taking steps forward. But yeah, for you, what does it mean? What has it been like for you?
Yeah, so it's weird to say like a new art form because in a way, in one sense, it sounds so pretentious. It's like, oh, we're not doing the same thing, we're creating something new. But but the point of it really, what it comes down to is creation and the creative process, I
Mhm.
think. So um, the end result of, well, there are a billion end results of art, right? We could get into that. But one of them is to evoke a feeling, evoke some sort of reaction. And in a way, a painting could evoke a very similar reaction to a song. But if
Mhm.
you look at what truly the difference is the medium and the creative process, right? Painting a
Mhm.
picture is a completely different thing than writing a song.
Mhm.
So, and within music, right, the creative process has largely looked the same for a
Right.
very long time, at least within the realm of Western music, what we all live in right now. Um, so the reason why I feel that this is a new art form rather than just a different form of musical storytelling, well, it's somewhere in between, is because the creative process looks so vastly different.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's really what it takes is to look at the creative process at every step and allow it to be different. Allow us to go outside of our preconceptions of what creating music is and what opera is and what I mean, I think I say in our trailer, right? If our story, something along the lines of if our stories are meant to challenge the way you look at the world, our sounds are meant to make you challenge the way you think of music or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think that truly music can be anything.
Yeah.
And and storytelling can be anything. And so what we're aiming to do is at every step of the process, um, change it, and not just, I think it actually grew out of somewhat of a contrarian idea of like, I want to do something different. I want to do something new. I want to do
Mhm.
something that's never been done. I think it started out there, but what it ends up being is if you open yourself up to changes, then you open yourself up to all these new ideas, like why classical musicians, we hate MIDI sounds, right? We think of that as
Yeah.
completely inauthentic,
Yeah.
and it might just be authentic in a different way. It might be something different. If you compare a MIDI piano track to a live pianist,
Yeah.
they're
That's
not the same.
yeah.
But besides the fact that the timbre of each instrument sounds kind of the same with some notable differences, um, they can exist in their own worlds and
Mhm.
both be completely real and completely wonderful in their own ways. So that's something we've played around with is doing music that is set to electronic tracks. And then I think the other main difference in terms of how POCO is flirting with being another art form is the fact that one of the biggest things in music is live collaboration.
Right.
And absolutely nothing in our podcast was live collaboration, even down to the dialogue in the Quaker piece, Friend's House.
Wow.
All of the dialogue there is recorded. It would be like me, sitting there with my mic and just saying, "Oh, really? Okay, that's a really good point." Like something like that. And we had short coachings to hit the lines off each other and see what we think would sound good. And then we all did our own recordings. And then I came back and with a producer at the back end of it and lined all those things up. So truly, we are trying to find, and some of them work, some of them don't. That's why this season was so different, each episode is because we probably went through 4 or 5 different approaches to even how to mix each episode. We have a wonderful, wonderful recording engineer, Lexington Bowler, who actually is in Harrisonburg right now and also went to JMU. And he has done a lot of great work on taking all of these disparate recording sources and people recording in their own homes with whatever technology they have and bringing it together to resemble something that we all recognize. So yeah, to bring it back, I think that in terms of creating a new art form, in addition to being a little crazy, I think that you have to fundamentally change how the art is created.
I love that. I know that part of what is being done is also composition, how do I want to say this? Because obviously, I was going to say composition focused on the story. However, that's what usually happens is composition. You have your libretto, and then you compose based on that libretto. However, this is different where it's sometimes from what I've heard is there's like composition made from live speech or like speech compared to like a written out story, if that makes any sense. Do
you mean like the composition of the episode?
Yeah, like
not necessarily like the musical, but harmonies underneath, but
even the musical composition seems like it's taken from not just like, oh, this is the story and I'm setting it to music, more of like, this is the conversation or this is the topic that we're discussing and it's being set to music.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they're kind of the same thing, but I'm wondering if you can chat a little bit about what that process is like. And, I know that you've been working with a composer and working with other, other artists. So what is that like, having to not be near each other, but having to still have that kind of like team work and team building? What's that been like?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the starting points of creating a new process, is that there are pretty definitive roles in, I'm going to say opera, but I really do mean all music. I mean, you and I come from a background of largely opera, and it is in some ways, a very codified art form in terms of its creation. It's very regulated in terms of the roles in ways that we don't think of, right? We think of the performer as having some liberty in terms of a portrayal of a character, but so much of that is dictated by the composer. Right. So much of that is, I think it's the concentration of creative power is what I would bring it down to. So that is part of what POCO does, is it takes that concentration of creative power and spreads it out over multiple people, right? So we have, and actually we make a point to call everyone artists or collaborators instead of labeling them as the composer for this, the librettist, and like we want to give them credit for what they did, right? So we don't hide from that. But the aim is that everyone will be an equal collaborator in this end composition. Sorry, I'm going on a little tangent here, but
this is exactly you're in the alley of what I was asking.
So I think to speak to that process, what we've done is, instead of a step-by-step process, which you would normally think of as someone composes a work, fully,
Right.
and then hands it off for interpretation to a music director, orchestra, or other instrumentalists, singer, performers, actors, right? Instead of that, where it's handed off, what we've done is we've brought that all into one collaborative space. So I end up kind of being the link through all of it, just because we need some link through all of it. But how Friend's House started, Mallory, which is our second production, was actually a little bit different, because that was a composed piece that was meant to be performed live that we then adapted for the podcast medium. But Friend's House was truly our first commissioned full podcast opera. And how it started was I found a librettist and a composer who I've worked with in the past, and we sat down and we talked ideas. We spent about an hour and a half just talking about what it meant to write for a podcast. And we left a lot of things open-ended. And then our librettist went out and came up with some story ideas, one of which really integrates the audience as collaborators as well, which we did a little bit of this season, but we'll do a lot more of next season. So everyone, stay tuned in for that.
Yes.
But we ended up honing in on this idea of a Quaker commune, which was so unique. And so we wrote this story, and then our composer went and, did his process with it, but left certain things open-ended. And it went through, it's hard to talk about the process because it went back and forth so much. So like the certain underscoring of sections were done after the entire thing was put together. We had to put together all the dialogue, and then he added more underscoring there to tie sections better together. And then I'm the one who produces the interviews and episodes. And so there's an aspect of composition there as well, to bringing in, I listen to the full musical work, and then I do these interviews. And as you know, as an interviewer, it's hard to know what you're going to get out of someone. You can ask certain questions, but you don't know where it's going to go. So part of the fun in that is for me to listen closely to like undercurrents of the story that then I can pull and supplement by something that someone said on an interview. And then, so I try to weave it throughout, and it's just so much fun. Because it's different, there's no real process. There's no real, well, there is a process, but there isn't a process that's set out for us.
Right. You're creating it. You're making the process.
So although we have people in these certain roles, they don't necessarily reflect the roles that we're used to.
Right. Wow.
I think I got to your answer somewhere in there.
No, yeah, you did. You did. That's one of the things I was just thinking about is like, what is that like to be in a creative process where it's not like I'm giving this to you and now interpret it. That's exactly where it was going, because that I couldn't really put that into words what I was feeling, but that's pretty much it. Like that's the difference, is it's fully collaborative, which I think that the operatic art form, the new directors, the new producers of works, the new librettists and singers, we're in the space of trying to start doing that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, quite frankly, it just needs to happen that way, because opera is an old ass art form.
It is.
And in order for it to not, croak out, we've got to start becoming innovative and productive. And I love that what you're doing is taking a space where you wouldn't think, like, there's the like opera talks, and on this week you have Aida, and then it's like the music, but this is like a whole new thing. Which, speaking of, I thought this question was really interesting, that you sent, which is, why do you think certain genres cross over all the time and others don't? Why don't we see other genres crossing over with opera more often? And that's a great question. We should.
Yeah. So this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I hate the idea of genre because of how it's used.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that as humans, looking socially, evolutionarily, we categorize things to understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is completely natural, and we need to. But I have this theory that's been, percolating inside for years that and it goes hand in hand with the fact that I do not believe that art is just entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And we all say it. I say it all the time, but we don't see it, I think, in society.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone always says, like, for everyone who doesn't respect art, like, imagine what your life would be if you didn't hear music in a day, right? If it was just all gone in the background of stores, in everywhere. It is so intertwined in our lives. And I think it's a huge misstep to think that it's just there to entertain us, or to even just reflect what's happening. I think it truly is part of what's happening. And so I have this idea that genres, whatever it is inside of us, and whether that is something that we can't pinpoint or whether it's legitimately a neurological function, that our tendency to separate genres and then stick to those groups so heavily and so vehemently comes from the same place that prejudice comes from, right? Where we are able to see a person's skin color or sexual orientation or anything else about them and then categorize them into the group and then identify those groups together. And that can be constructive in life, right? Like, we have different countries, we have different languages, those things can be constructive. But the problem is when you hear people taking it too far.
Right.
And when you hear people saying, one of the things I hate to hear is like, I love, and a lot of people say this, I love all music except for insert here. I love all music except for country, except for rap, except for heavy metal. And yeah, so I think that's like the basis of the genre idea, which is that I think that it's okay to categorize music, but we have to open those boundaries a little bit. And then the question is, how do you do that? Right? How do you do that if you hate the twang of country just because you hate the twang of country? That's legitimate. If you don't enjoy listening to it, you don't need to listen to it. But the problem is you're also cutting off then an entire culture. You're the people who complain about the boots and mud and beer and trucks and country songs. It shows that they don't understand a culture of people for whom that is important. The same can be said about people who don't understand all of the incredible political and social statements in NWA songs, right? It's just a context thing. So all this to say, I think that genres have trouble crossing over because they don't have things in common. And that sounds so, basic, right? But in order to cross over, there has to be these like anchor points that you can go off of. So to explain that a little bit more, right? Like what's the song? Old Town Road. Which I hate the song, but I think it's genius because what they do is it's a masterful crossover of country and hip hop, which is so hard to do. Because so many aspects of that, from the instrumentation to the story they're telling to, all sorts of things, they look completely opposite. Right. But what they've done there is they're able to cross it over because they've focused on the rhythm. They've found a melodic, repetitive line that could, exist in both worlds. They found an aesthetic that works, right? That I think it's like Lil Nas X, right? And then Billy Ray Cyrus, the clothes they wear when they perform it
Yep. Hip hop cowboy.
Yeah, in a way, it really works, and they find these anchor points, and that makes it work.
Right.
Whereas if you compare it to other country hip hop crossover, there's this awful song. I love Brad Paisley so much, and I
Mhm.
love LL Cool J, right? But they did this song called "Accidental Racist." That is the worst attempt at country hip hop crossover I've ever heard, because it ends up being, and they tried, but it ends up being this superficial, shallow crossover where what they're trying to do is talk about a social issue.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it just doesn't work. So I think the reason that that it's hard to cross over with opera is because we don't have those anchor points, right? Everything, going back to the creative process, everything in that creative process is so unique to opera. And by opera, I also mean, Western classical music and all that stuff. So it's hard to find those anchor points. Another good example of where someone's actually done this. So I think that the bad that we see are the Josh Grobens and the Andrea Bocellis. They're incredible. They're incredible singers. They are extremely they're extremely productive, right? Extremely proficient, successful artists. But opera singers get mad when people call it opera. Because just because Josh Groban on his ah vowel can throw some resonance behind it, doesn't mean that it's opera, right? What is happening there is they're either taking operatic repertoire, is what Andrea Bocelli does, and Josh Groban doesn't do so much of that, but he does do the resonant space that is identified with classical music. And they take that and they mix in a bunch of the pop world and pop context. Right. So that's one type of crossover. But I think the most effective classical crossover I've seen is an NPR Tiny Desk concert with Joyce DiDonato, the Queen. She's incredible. And she does songs from the, the 24 Italian art songs? Yeah. She does like Say to Mommy and like does that with a jazz trio or quartet behind her. And the way she does it, she's able to keep the integrity of her vocal technique, adding in a little bit more lilt for a little bit more of a jazzy sound with a new underscoring behind her and a new instrumentation, but it's done so convincingly. Right. And that's because they use what I call anchor points, right? They use more or less the same instrumentation, and they just change a little bit of the feel, and they change the underscoring harmonic structure, and but they're able to keep it, I don't know, authentic. I hate the word authentic. It's so vague.
Keep it so that it's not a cheesy interpretation.
Yes, and that's what I call constructive versus destructive crossover. So I think that the way I define it is that constructive crossover is crossover that so I think for crossover to be crossover, it has to kind of create something new. But if that new thing can be created without detracting from the pure forms, then it's constructive. I think destructive is that stuff that we hear that doesn't quite hit, right? I've heard people take pop songs and just sing them with operatic technique. And to me, that might work for some people. It doesn't really work for me because it's not relatable. It doesn't feel authentic. And so I would look at that as destructive is kind of a strong word, but destructive crossover, where it kind of cheapens the original in order to create this merge.
Right. It's interesting because I feel like a couple of artists I know that come to mind for constructive crossover would be like Dawn Holiday, or a friend of mine, a friend of mine, Anastasia Bain. She does she's classically trained. However, she also does musical theater and pop music. And like John is classically trained. However, he also does jazz. And John is kind of
Yeah.
The Voice. You
It's
know,
incredible. His
it's
audition was, it's
amazing.
one of the only things I've seen from The Voice in like
Yeah,
10
like
years.
I do
It's so good.
not watch like singing competitions because I'm like, no, ma'am.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times the singers are not, you can, you can tell that the judges are looking for something specific.
Yeah.
And I feel like he brings so many aspects and he's such a
Mhm.
well learned musical person.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is what makes the difference between the destructive and constructive crossover is in order for it to be successful, both parties that are joining together or whatever you're taking from, you have to have an extensive knowledge of both spaces,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So like if I wanted to do a crossover of funk and opera, which if someone does that, please give me credit in the, you know, um, I would need to know funk artists. I would need to know
Mhm.
what makes something sound, have that sound. I would need to know who's Bootsy Collins and P Funk.
Yep.
And, I would need to know that as a background in order to facilitate this art form that I'm trying to make. And like you were saying, the anchor points, you have to know, well, what makes why does something sound operatic and why does something sound funky?
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, opera is just a different singing technique that uses a little bit more resonance and different vowel placements compared to another technique that may use more relaxed vowel placements and straight tone, whatever it may
Yeah.
be. And in order for that to really truly work, you have to know both sides. And if you
Mhm.
don't know it, then it comes off extremely, it just comes off like, what, like, why are you doing that? It's not authentic.
Yeah.
And it has to, I think, you have to, wherever your art form is that you're specific in, you have to approach it more on that space than the other space, right?
Mhm.
So, like, if I were approaching, like Joyce did with jazz, I'm not a jazz singer typically. I
Yeah.
can sing jazz, but I need to come at it from first an operatic perspective, incorporating jazz, instead of me trying to be a jazz singer
Yeah.
and incorporating opera.
Well, and that's where I hear, actually, that's a really good example of it because I try to be open and understanding, but
Mhm.
I am a human, so there are things that just irk me a little bit,
Mhm.
and one of those has always been opera singers pretending or convincing themselves that they know how to sing jazz.
Mhm.
Because first of all, jazz is a historically um, cheated art form
Mhm.
from its creators,
Mhm.
right? It is a prime example of white people taking a black cultural product and saying, "Okay, this is ours now,"
Mhm.
and so there, I think there's that background for it. But I see a lot of opera singers thinking that they can just relax their tone into a lighter,
Mhm.
straight tone and add a little bit more lilt, and what they're doing is it might be beautiful, but it's not them understanding and performing jazz, it's them mimicking a jazz sound.
Right.
And that's why, like, I think that opera cabarets are the coolest thing ever, but you have to be careful, right? It's like, if you're gonna, and it might not be how you sing it, it might be how you frame it, you
Right.
know. Don't frame yourself as being a jazz artist now. And yeah, it's interesting. It's like I took actually, this is making me reflect on myself now because I took jazz harmonization classes,
Mhm.
and I arranged jazz, and I have that in the arranging section of my website. I
Mhm.
have, like, okay, here's some jazz things I've done, right?
Mhm.
But perhaps I shouldn't. Perhaps that is not authentic for me to have that up there, just because I understand the harmonic structure of what I'm doing doesn't mean that I should be allowed to promote that. So I
But
don't know. That's something I'll have to think
but
about.
you know what? I don't know because you took the time to try to understand and to understand
Yeah.
the art form, right? there's a difference there than just going in and being like, oh, well, I'm gonna sing How High the Moon,
Mm-hmm.
and have no understanding in what is actually the harmonic function of the piece.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe someone who's naturally musically gifted can go in and be like, da-dun, da-dun, dun, dun, and feel what you're supposed to do. But if that's not your first learned genre, to take the time to understand, right, and to keep expanding your knowledge, I don't think that's an issue. I think it's an issue where you just go in and you're like, oh, well, like, I sing jazz sometimes in my shower, I think. So, like, I'm going to try to do it.
Well, and that's where it's like, if I say to myself, like, if I say, and I don't call myself a jazz arranger,
Mm-hmm.
but I am an arranger who can integrate some jazz in there.
Right.
That's okay, and yeah, I think that another interesting spin-off of this, going back to what I said about how music isn't separate,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't believe that music is just a reflection of social issues and things like that. That's like a very romantic, 1820s idea that got stuck in our heads, and we just think of music as this supernatural thing above us. But what was I going to say? There's something about storytelling that is the same exact way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I am if you go down the list, right, I'm a cis heterosexual white male.
Mm-hmm.
I do have immigrants in my lineage, pretty close, but still I identify in the world largely as a white male, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't tell the immigrant story. I can't tell that. I can't tell. I am an ally for so many groups, but I can't. It's not my place to tell their story, and I think that's what, with the recent, in June all the way up until now, protests, mm-hmm. people are starting to realize, mm-hmm. is that this isn't our time to tell the story. This is our time to listen, mm-hmm. And to those who can tell it, and that's also one of the missions of POCO, is to our next season. What I want to do is highlight different demographic groups, mm-hmm. and for all of the creative teams to be people who identify as that. So that, because if you do that, you don't have to try to mimic a sound. You don't have to try to, it's just all of those experiences, as far as the story goes and the sound, all of those experiences just organically manifest. And I think that the end product you get is more interesting. And that's a thing that I think that opera struggles with as a whole. I think that opera tries to, take a Mozart opera and pull, current events into it, whether doing it from costumes or staging. And I don't know. I think there's limit. I think it can be done very well. I've seen it done extremely well, but I think it's limited.
Well, it's also about knowing both the places that you're trying to pull from,
mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly.
Like, if you're trying to put Le Notte di Figaro in inner city, in Detroit, like, you need to have people on your team who can understand the experiences of what these people would be experiencing in that place.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you can't tell a story without getting told from the people who experience the story, unless it's something that you're creating brand new. You're telling a story of, if you're in that space, okay, well, we are in the intergalactic.
That's the thing. Sci-fi can do it.
Place, great. Then you're creating that is from scratch, honey, and fierce. But if you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to take influence from, whether it be a culture, a lifestyle, as something as simple, well, not as simple, but as complex, actually, as gender, right? Like, the gender structures for so long have been binary. Actually, Actually, the real tea is they haven't always been binary,
No.
but in our,
In
modern
our recent memory.
memory, binary spaces. So you need to converse and you need to engross yourself into whatever it is that you're trying to incorporate into a story. I just think it's so you can always tell when someone or a company is trying to do something and they have absolutely no clue about anything dealing with the culture. And even if they feel like they're a part of that culture, right? Like if I feel like, okay, I'm a part of the LGBTQ culture, I personally don't have the experience of a trans person, right? So yes, I might be a part of the LGBTQ culture, but there's still spaces within the culture that I myself don't know about. And if I were to tell a story, I would need to talk to people who lived in that experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it gets kind of like unauthentic. But I want to ask one more question. So there's a lot of virtual performances happening in response to the pandemic. How is POCO different? How are y'all approaching? I mean, you've kind of discussed this a little bit.
Yeah.
But, what makes you unique?
So I think what it comes down to is, well, I want to stress first of all that as with so many things in life, there's not better and worse. And I think that's also a fallacy that we fall into especially in an academic music world where we are taught to go after this one technique and to perfect it. And because of that, and because we're graded on that, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, but we end up thinking of things as tiered from great to bad, right? People feel they have the right to say one music is better than another, which in one way seems so natural to say. Saying country sucks. Okay, maybe you don't like it, but I don't think you can say one music is better than another. And no matter, you can specify a rubric and then grade it on your rubric, but I don't know what weight that actually has. So I do want to make sure that I'm not like disparaging any of the work that's been done, because I think that everyone's ability to adapt music to a virtual medium has been a ton of work, and it's largely being done very well.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that we were not ready for, not expecting, and people are doing well with it. But I think the main thing that sets POCO apart is that it's truly written for the medium. I think that virtual performance will never be live performance. And there are some examples of people trying to do that, right? With bigger orchestral groups, you see them putting out movements of things where it's done virtually and put together. And that's really great. That's not going to be a long-term solution. That's going to be something that'll scratch the itch until live music comes back, perhaps. But if things want to have staying power, they need to be innovative. You were saying this earlier, they need to adapt, they need to be innovative, and they need to truly accept the medium into their creation and their creative process. And so I think that, there are a couple different types of virtual performances happening right now. There are ones that are trying to replicate as close as possible a live music experience, and then ones that are truly adapting and maybe not adapting, actually, maybe it's adapting versus innovating. And that was one of my goals when I started POCO, and you alluded to this earlier too. It's like, is it an opera about podcast, right? There are a couple really great, podcast about opera. There are a couple of really great talk podcasts that talk about opera,
right?
And then I don't think there that I know of any operas about podcasts. I'm sure that there are podcasts that make appearances in operas.
Pop up next
But
week.
yeah, seriously. I mean, that's the cool thing about opera. People are doing everything now.
Yeah.
People are doing everything now. But yeah, I think that's one of the main goals that I had, was to create something new, and just instead of just trying to replicate live performance. And it's a very tough process internally. It's very hard to tell singers, and it's hard to tell a composer, okay, you've given me the score. It's not going to look exactly like you finished it. You know, I'm going to take liberties when I'm producing. We're going to do weird things with this. And I'm really sorry, but that's like, you know, how it's going to have to be, because we have to be adaptable. Right. And it's hard to tell singers, like, you're going to have a short coaching, and then you're going to have to record this on your own. And yeah, it's difficult, but I think it ends up being cool. Yeah.
I agree. I think it really does end up being cool. It really ends up being, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's not taking something that was meant for live performance and putting it into a virtual space. It's creating something for a virtual space, creating music, creating entertainment for a virtual space, which is not what most music does. That's not what most music is for. And I think that it's really cool that you're thinking about this now, because as we go forth and technology continues to evolve, I mean, that is an aspect and a space in which people will want and need that. Like,
yeah,
yes, I can't go to, I'm on the train for 8 hours. I can't go, you know, to a show during that 8 hours. However, I can listen to this innovative podcast that is actually an opera performance that's not a live performance, but an opera performance made for the virtual space. So it works better orally,
yeah,
and musically and artistically than when you just try to put it into the space it wasn't made for. Like, because it's made for this space, it just kind of like rotates together like a good set of gears should do.
Well, that's a whole conversation too about opera, right? Because what's great about opera is that we're literally you know, honing our voices into acoustics, to natural phenomena that allow your voice to be heard, you know, in an auditorium that seats hundreds of people, right, if not thousands of people. And it doesn't, that's one of the hardest things to get to replicate when you're going through compressed audio, right? It doesn't work. It can work, but you're not going to get the same feeling. You're not going to, if you listen to like a YouTube video of Pavarotti singing Nessun Dorma, I mean, I still cry, right? But if you were listening to it live, like, there's nothing. And that's exactly what I said. I might have said it to you. I said it to some other people about doing socially distanced live performance last week or a couple weeks ago, is that I forgot what live music feels like. I know what it sounds like. You know, I'll never forget that. But I forgot that it, like, gets into your body and evokes these feelings. And you just can't do that virtually. You can try and you can evoke other feelings, but you can't evoke the same. So I think that it is a miscalculation to try to adapt too much of, you know, live performance to a virtual medium. Right. Yeah,
and that's why you're creating your own space within virtual medium,
which I have to say, it I was going to say one of the differences between us and other virtual stuff is that we're trying to look like proactively instead of reactively to the pandemic. But I don't think that's true, because I mean, I've been, as I said, percolating this idea for like 5 or 6 years now, but it definitely was a reactive thing because COVID hit, and then I went, now's my chance, right? Now is this chance of people accepting virtual media. And I was like, now I need to try it. So we actually had to change a lot of our processes to be more remote, to record on whatever $30 USB thing someone has, and then to take care of that editing on the back end and a lot of things. So I think that we're all reacting. I mean, we're all reacting to everything all the time right now, because who knows what's going on. But, change is the only constant, so that's okay. But, yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
For being on today. And I want to thank you for introducing us to this new kind of space in music. And I cannot wait to look forward, or cannot wait to hear actually the second season. I know that you're working on it now.
Yeah.
And so I'm so excited to listen and enjoy what's to come, and see where you can take this space of virtual operatic performance. I really am so excited about it. And can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm excited. Everyone can look forward to season 2 coming out sometime this spring. And actually, if I can say one more thing, please. Circling back to your theme of productivity, right? There's also something to productivity to having to do with collaboration. So I do want to say, I think that today I've been talking a lot about my ideas and the ideas that I hold, but POCO and this idea, the reason it was an idea for 5 years or 6 years is because I was trying to do it myself and my productivity was limited. So I do want to say a huge thank you to my entire team, my co-founder Eric, and Shaul and Abigail and Carly, and to all of our incredible artists. I think we have 12 total artists that worked on this season. And then Lex Bowler, who is our recording engineer, and Jeff Devine, who actually did the sound design, because we had a sound design person for all the effects and stuff that we had. So none of this would be possible if I wasn't able to, trust these incredible people to be productive. And I think that's why we ended up getting it done, is because we all work together. So, yeah, I got to plug them because they're really the entire reason this is a thing and the entire reason I'm here. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, okay. So I'm going to let you go, but hang back in the studio for me. But I just want to say again, thank you so much for being on What's the Tea. And
yeah, thank you.
Are so appreciative of you volunteering your time and being in a space where we can discuss art and your life. All right. Thanks again, Henry.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who tuned in today. It is so amazing to have your support as always, and we look forward to bringing you new and exciting things in the future. Please be on the lookout for our next episode. We may be taking a break. So usually, we have episodes every other week, but we might have a little holiday break for Thanksgiving. And also, don't forget that we do have a podcast out now. The latest episode is up, episode 3. And you can get it wherever you get your podcast. Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you like to listen, you can get that podcast called What's the Tea with ACP. Again, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you and hope that you have a good rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye. is the tea with ACP. That's kind of cute.